Imagine being locked inside a prison cell for a year and 8 months.
Wow.
Yeah, and you aren't there because you committed a violent act or, stole anything. You're just sitting on this cold cot, totally stripped of your freedom, all because of a handful of social media retweets. Literally just retweets. And these are retweets that had almost zero engagement. Now just imagine sitting in that cell, you're deprived of sleep, you're facing these relentless interrogations where they're demanding your passwords, and you decide to write a defense manifesto.
I mean, most people in that situation would just write a standard legal appeal, right?
Exactly.
They'd look for a procedural loophole or just, beg for mercy or honestly just say whatever the authorities want to hear so they make it stop.
Right, just make it stop. But instead, you write a 20,000-word document using statistical physics, network topology, and cognitive psychology.
That is, it's wild.
Just to prove that the charges against you are mathematically and scientifically impossible?
It honestly sounds like the inciting incident of a cyberpunk novel or something. You've got this raw brute force power of the state just colliding head-on with the immutable laws of the universe. But this is an incredibly real, meticulously documented case.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because our mission for this deep dive is to explore an extraordinary set of analytical documents detailing the real-world case of Dr. Chen Jingyuan.
Right.
He's a physics PhD who was charged with a crime called picking quarrels and provoking trouble.
Which is often abbreviated in the legal system as PXQT.
Right, PXQT. And his crime was using a VPN to retweet foreign and political content on Twitter. We're talking about like standard posts from the U.S. Embassy and an innocent cartoon of an umbrella girl.
And just to clarify for everyone listening, we are not taking any political sides here.
Oh, absolutely not.
We are just looking objectively at the source material to see how he used hard science and psychology to dismantle this legal judgment.
Yeah, exactly. We're exploring his 20,000-word self-defense and blood petition in prison, which the sources literally describe as a cross-disciplinary dimensional strike.
I love that phrasing.
It's so good. We want to impartially examine what this clash reveals about human logic, physics, and state power. So let's start with the core legal charge that put him in that cell to begin with.
Right. So to be found guilty of picking quarrels and provoking trouble in this specific context, the legal system requires a results-based criteria.
Meaning what, exactly?
The prosecution had to prove that Dr. Chen's retweets caused serious public disorder. Like, they argued that his actions on the internet created a severe disruption to social stability.
But hold on, let's look at the mechanics of that claim for a second, because I really want to push back on their underlying logic there.
Go for it.
Are they leaning on a sort of like butterfly effect theory here?
That's essentially it, yeah.
Like this idea that if he tweets a sensitive political opinion, even to a tiny audience, it could theoretically ripple out and cause massive chaos. It's like a single snowball rolling down a mountain, picking up momentum until it triggers an avalanche of social unrest.
What's fascinating here is how Dr. Chen takes that exact snowball assumption and just completely obliterates it using network science.
Okay, how so?
Well, social media platforms like Twitter aren't just random, chaotic collections of people shouting into a void. They actually have a very specific, measurable mathematical structure.
Right.
They are what physicists call scale-free networks.
Scale-free networks. Okay, so the distribution of connections isn't equal, right?
Exactly.
You have these massive hub nodes, so that's your official media accounts, global celebrities or politicians with tens of millions of followers.
Right, the heavy hitters.
And then you have the vast majority of users, which are the peripheral nodes, who are honestly just talking to a few friends.
Dr. Chen was the ultimate peripheral node.
Oh, totally.
I mean, his account had fewer than 100 followers. So to dismantle the prosecution's butterfly effect argument, he didn't just sit there and argue that he was unimportant. He actually brought in Cohen's critical threshold formula.
Okay, Cohen's critical threshold formula. What is that?
It's a foundational concept in physics, published around the year 2000. It calculates exactly how many nodes you would need to remove or disturb to cause a scale-free network to collapse.
So it's a mathematical proof for system failure.
Yeah, think of a scale-free network like a global airline map, right? You have massive hubs like JFK, Heathrow, or Dubai.
Sure.
If a massive blizzard shuts down a tiny regional airport in rural Idaho, which is a peripheral node, the global flight network barely even notices.
Right, the air traffic just naturally routes through the massive hubs instead.
Exactly. And the mathematical conclusion of Cohen's formula proves that random failures or disturbances at the edges are instantly absorbed by the network's topology.
So the system is designed to handle it.
Right. You would literally have to destroy almost all of the ordinary nodes to make the system-wide connectivity collapse.
Wow. Okay, so because he is a tiny node, his capacity to cause a system-wide collapse isn't just unlikely, it's mathematically prohibited by the physical structure of the network itself.
Yeah, and he took the math even further than that. He applied the Galton-Watson extinction theorem.
The Galton-Watson extinction theorem.
Yeah, so in complex systems, we measure how a signal cascades using an average branching number, which is represented by the letter R.
Wait, like the R-naught value in epidemiology?
Yes, perfect analogy.
Okay, because if the R-naught of a virus is less than 1, the outbreak just dies out naturally, right? Because each infected person passes it to like less than one other person on average.
The underlying logic is very, very similar, just applied to network physics here. Because Dr. Chen's account had a near zero interaction rate. I mean, he had no likes, no retweets of his retweets. His R value was drastically less than 1.
Okay, so it was never going to spread.
Right. In the strict terms of physics, this means his account was in a deep subcritical state. His posts were mathematically destined for extinction.
There was no cascading avalanche possible.
None at all.
But, I mean, couldn't an algorithm change that? We know social media algorithms artificially boost controversial content all the time.
Sure, they do.
So couldn't a single retweet get picked up by the algorithm, go incredibly viral, and just completely defy that math?
It's a valid question. It really is. But Dr. Chen accounts for the system's overall environment using the fluctuation dissipation theorem, or FDT.
FTT.
Okay? This is a cornerstone of non-equilibrium statistical physics. Basically, FDT explains how a massive, complex system responds to a tiny external disturbance.
Right.
The internet is a gigantic system with tens of millions of active users generating content every single second. So in physics terms, it has a massive heat capacity and an incredibly high baseline of background noise.
Okay, I think I'm following.
So even if an algorithm amplifies a small signal, the system's overarching capacity to absorb and dissipate energy remains the dominant force for those peripheral nodes.
Let me see if I can visualize this. It's kind of like throwing an ice cube into an active volcano, right?
That's a great way to look at it.
The prosecution is essentially arguing that the ice cube might freeze the magma.
Right.
But FDT says the volcano has such a massive heat capacity that the ice cube is just instantly dissipated. It literally evaporates before it can even make a splash.
Exactly. Dr. Chen's retweet was a microscopic fluctuation that the internet instantly absorbed.
Wow.
The system's innate ability to absorb that energy means the severe public disorder never happened. And, we don't just have to rely on the theoretical physics here.
There's actual data.
Yeah, Dr. Chen pointed out the empirical data. A year after his arrest, those original posts were still online, and they still had zero interaction.
That is wild.
So physics proves his actions couldn't possibly cause public disorder, and the hard data proved that they didn't.
Okay, so the physics absolutely prove his innocence.
Well.
The math is undeniable, and the empirical data backs it up completely.
Yep.
Which forces me to ask, the prosecutors had this data, right?
They did.
They could see he had no retweets. How in the world do they look at a zero engagement post about an umbrella girl and see a national security threat? Are they just, like, ignoring the math on purpose? Or is there something happening in their brains that allows them to justify this conviction?
Well, to convict him legally, they had to prove more than just a disruption, right? They had to prove subjective intent.
Ah, okay. Subjective intent.
The prosecution needed to prove that Dr. Chen knew he was spreading false rumors and actually intended to cause harm.
Right.
But their logic for proving the subjective intent was entirely circumstantial and, frankly, based purely on his identity. They argued that because Dr. Chen has a high education and holds a PhD, he must have known the information was a false rumor. And that proves his malicious intent.
Here's where it gets really interesting, and honestly a bit absurd. Because isn't the entire point of a PhD program to train someone to question everything?
Exactly.
A scholar is specifically trained to not jump to absolute conclusions. You view information as a hypothesis to be tested, not a guaranteed fact.
Right.
Furthermore, how can an art piece like the cartoon of the Umbrella Girl, or even a foreign politician's speech, be legally classified as a falsifiable rumor?
It doesn't make any sense.
An opinion, or a speech, or a piece of art isn't an objective fact you could just prove false in a laboratory.
You're hitting on the exact cognitive friction at the heart of this trial. If we look this through the lens of cognitive psychology, We see a massive clash between two entirely different information processing models.
Okay, tell me more about that.
The judicial system, in this case, was heavily reliant on System 1 thinking. This is the fast, automatic, intuitive part of the brain that relies on heuristics and biases.
It's the brain taking a shortcut to save energy, right?
Exactly.
Like jumping to a conclusion based on a stereotype because actually analyzing all the data just takes too much mental effort.
Right, and specifically, they were using what psychologists call schema-driven processing.
Schema-driven processing.
Yeah, a schema is just a mental framework. In the high-pressure environment of state security, the prosecutors likely had a pre-existing hypervigilant schema for an instability threat.
So they were already on edge looking for problems.
Totally. When they saw the raw data points, a highly educated PhD using a VPN to bypass the firewall and retweeting foreign political content, their brains immediately snapped those pieces into that threat schema.
Oh, I see.
They didn't process him as a curious scholar seeking diverse viewpoints. Their mental shortcut processed him as a highly capable and therefore highly dangerous subversive element.
And once that scheme is locked in, confirmation bias just completely takes over the steering wheel.
100%.
They actively ignore the data that contradicts their internal theory, like the fact that his tweets had literally zero engagement.
Right.
They just focus on the narrative that fits their predetermined conclusion, like, he's smart, he's reading foreign news, he must be trying to cause chaos.
Meanwhile, Dr. Chen is operating entirely in System 2.
Which is the analytical one.
Yeah, the analytical, deliberate, logical part of the brain. He realizes he can't fight their emotional schema with emotion, so he flips their entire argument upside down. He actually uses his education as his primary shield.
Oh, that's clever. How does he do that?
He argues in his manifesto, "You say my PhD proves I knew I was causing harm. But because I am an expert in complex systems and statistical physics, I knew my actions were mathematically and scientifically harmless.
Wow.
I knew my R value was less than 1. I understood the fluctuation dissipation theorem. Therefore, my education proves I completely lacked the subjective intent to cause a disruption."
That is an absolute brilliant jujitsu move right there. He just weaponized the prosecution's own premise. My expertise is exactly why I knew this was innocent.
Exactly.
But, you know, let's pause and really put ourselves in his shoes for a second.
Sure.
He's facing a system operating on deep confirmation bias. He's sitting in a secret trial where empirical evidence is just being openly ignored. Under that kind of crushing institutional pressure, most people would just plead guilty, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You say whatever you need to say to get a lighter sentence, get out of the cell, and get back to your life. So why did Dr. Chen choose to spend his time in a cell writing a 20,000-word scientific manifesto, knowing the people prosecuting him probably wouldn't even understand the math?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we really have to look at the psychology of defiance.
Okay.
From the perspective of humanistic and personality psychology, Dr. Chen's response is an extraordinary case study in human resilience. The sources detail that he was subjected to brutal conditions.
Like what?
We are talking about severe sleep deprivation, inadequate food, intense intimidation, and incredibly coercive interrogations. Under those physiological extremes, human beings usually regress.
Right, it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Exactly.
If you are starving, exhausted, and terrified, your brain only has the capacity to care about the bottom of the pyramid.
Right.
Basic physiological survival and safety. You aren't worried about abstract philosophy or writing a thesis. You honestly just want the pain to stop.
But Dr. Chen invaded Maslow's hierarchy. He bypassed his own immediate physiological safety and prioritized the very top of the pyramid, self-actualization.
Wow.
For a scholar whose entire identity is built on logical consistency and objective truth, admitting to a scientifically illogical charge just to save his own skin would have been a form of personality suicide.
Personality suicide. That's heavy.
He couldn't accept a false reality without destroying his own internal sense of who he was.
Which means he must have a very specific psychological profile to do that.
He does. If we use the Big 5 personality traits model, the data suggests Dr. Chen exhibits extremely high openness to experience.
Okay, but that doesn't just mean he likes trying new things, right?
No, not at all. This isn't just about enjoying travel or trying new foods. It's a fundamental driving psychological need to seek out information, to explore complex ideas, and to find the truth even if that truth is located across a digital firewall.
Mm.
And simultaneously, he exhibits very low agreeableness in this specific context.
Let's clarify that for everyone, because low agreeableness kind of sounds like he's just a jerk.
Yeah, it does sound like that.
But really just means he's the kind of guy who will gladly endure an awkward dinner party, or in this extreme case, a literal prison cell, rather than nod along to a lie.
Exactly.
He refuses to conform just for the sake of social harmony.
He will not compromise logical principles to placate an authority figure. And this brings us to Viktor Frankl's concept of the will to meaning.
Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust, right?
Yes, him. Frankl observed that individuals who survived extreme suffering often did so by finding a profound meaning in their ordeal. Dr. Chen turned his imprisonment into what he actually called a civilization experiment.
The civilization experiment.
Yeah, he refused to view himself as a helpless victim. Instead, he framed himself as a researcher, and the prison just became his laboratory.
Oh, man. He used his intellect as a literal shield against the trauma.
Yes. In clinical psychology, this is known as intellectualization. It's a very advanced defense mechanism. Instead of succumbing to the emotional terror and helplessness of his situation, he elevated himself above his captors.
Right.
He basically treated the prosecutors and interrogators as subjects in a sociological study of systemic bias.
That is unbelievable.
He maintained his dignity and his agency by meticulously analyzing the flaws in their logic. It was his way of maintaining total internal control in an environment where he had been stripped of all external control.
It's really awe-inspiring when you think about it. He retreats into the fortress of his own mind, a fortress built on the undeniable laws of physics and logic, where the state literally cannot reach him.
Exactly.
But having analyzed the physics of his actions and the psychology of his defiance, he doesn't just sit in that fortress, right?
No, he doesn't.
He fires back. He takes this meticulous defense and turns it into an offensive strike against the system itself.
He completely turns his manifesto into an ultimate indictment of the local judicial system. He moves beyond just physics and psychology and begins accusing the authorities of violating the nation's own supreme laws, as well as binding international agreements.
So what does this all mean for the people who actually locked him up? Like, how does a man locked in a cell put the state on trial?
Well, he does it by exposing the glaring legal and policy paradoxes of his conviction. His analysis starts with what legal scholars refer to as a pocket crime.
A pocket crime, meaning a broadly defined, vague law that authorities can use like a giant pocket, right?
Right.
They can just stuff any behavior they don't like into it. And picking quarrels and provoking trouble is the textbook example of a pocket crime.
Exactly. And Dr. Chen points out that the authorities were utilizing this pocket crime to punish his opinions and reading habits rather than any fabricated facts.
Right.
And here is his brilliant counterstrike.
Okay.
The prosecution claimed his zero-engagement tweets were fabricating rumors that disrupted society. Dr. Chen argued that if his mathematically harmless tweets are classified as rumors, then the official published legal verdicts, which falsely claim he caused serious public disorder without a single shred of empirical evidence, are themselves, legally speaking, published rumors.
Wow. He's pointing the finger right back at them.
Yep.
It's like he's saying, if anyone is spreading a fiction that disrupts the objective truth of what happened, it's the court that wrote this verdict.
That's exactly it.
He logically translates the exact charges right back onto the prosecutors.
And he elevates the argument even higher than that, moving to constitutional and international law.
Oh, wow.
The sources note his manifesto details how his trial violated Article 35 of the Chinese Constitution, which explicitly guarantees freedom of speech.
Right.
Furthermore, it violated the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, or the ICCPR.
Okay, what does that cover?
Specifically, Articles 9, 14, and 19. These articles protect against arbitrary detention, they guarantee the right to a fair and public trial, and they protect free expression.
And he didn't get a public trial.
No. Dr. Chen highlights that he was subjected to a secret trial and stripped of his right to a proper defense, which directly contravenes these international agreements.
And beyond the legal texts, there's a fascinating policy contradiction here, too. Because it's not just about the letter of the law, it's about the stated macro-level goals of the nation itself.
This is really where his analysis achieves a global perspective. Dr. Chen points out that criminalizing the reading and sharing of foreign perspectives directly contradicts the national policy of building a community with a shared future for mankind.
Right, I've heard of that.
It's a major, highly promoted state policy designed to foster cultural exchange, tolerance, and international cooperation.
It exposes a massive hypocrisy, honestly.
It really does.
You can't broadcast to the world that you're building a shared future for mankind while simultaneously throwing your own citizens into a prison cell for quietly reading what the rest of mankind is writing.
Exactly.
It's a complete disconnect between the macro-level political narrative and the micro-level judicial enforcement.
Dr. Chen's argument elegantly exposes that the local judicial system, in their rigid zeal to maintain localized stability, was actually actively undermining the nation's own strategic diplomatic goals.
Wow.
He wasn't just defending his own innocence anymore. He was defending the logical consistency of the law itself against a bureaucracy that had just completely lost its way.
It is an incredible journey. I mean, we started with a single individual sitting in a tiny prison cell, entirely stripped of his physical freedom.
Yeah.
And we watched him use the foundational laws of the universe, statistical physics, network topology, and psychological frameworks to completely dismantle the logical fallacies of a state judgment.
It's amazing.
He proved that you can lock up a body, but you cannot imprison laws of mathematics.
This raises an important question, I think, about the nature of authority and truth.
Yeah.
Like, how does a massive system that is fundamentally built on demanding obedience react when it collides with a single individual who demands logical consistency?
Right, doesn't know what to do.
The power of the state is vast. It can lock a person away, it can write a legal verdict, stamp it with official red seals, and declare it the absolute truth.
What?
But it cannot change the constants of physics. It cannot alter the mathematics of a scale-free network.
It really can't.
Dr. Chen's manifesto stands as a towering testament to the fact that while authority can dictate what is legal, it can never dictate what is objectively true.
It's the ultimate victory of the mind over the machine. And, brings us to a thought I want to leave directly with you, the listener.
Yeah.
We've been talking about Dr. Chen facing down a rigid, state-run legal system. But if you look around, we are all navigating systems every single day that are increasingly built on heuristics, biases, and automated schemas.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about the algorithms that curate your news feed and decide what you see, or the automated HR systems that screen your resumes and decide if you're even employable.
Or just rigid bureaucratic rules at your own workplace.
Exactly. If those systems decide to misinterpret your data points, like if an algorithm incorrectly places you in a threat schema, or a bureaucracy misreads your intent based on some rigid, unthinking checklist, how robust are your daily actions against that system?
That's a great question.
If you ever found yourself caught in the gears of a rigid, illogical machine that flat out refused to look at the truth, what would be your cross-disciplinary dimensional strike to defend your reality? It's something to really think about the next time you feel like an ice cube being tossed into a volcano.